What's up? Welcome to Backend Stuff. I'm Jacob Blitzo, here to help you build tech for the future. Think about scalability, reliability, and cost. If you want to learn how to build scalable, production-ready APIs, hit that subscribe button now. This is episode 1 in our first REST API. What is a REST API? It's an application programming interface that conforms to the constraints of REST architectural style and allows for interaction with RESTful web services. REST stands for Representational State Transfer and was created by a computer scientist by the name Roy Fielding. At the most basic level, an API is a mechanism that enables an application or service to access a resource within another application or service. The application or service doing the accessing is called the client, and the application or service containing the resource is called the server. Let's go ahead and open up our terminal, command space terminal, enter, and I'll make this bigger for you so you can see it. All right, let's go ahead and CD to our desktop, and let's create our first API project. So all this should be very familiar to you. So we're going to do mix new r underscore first underscore API. Now, the only thing you're not going to recognize here, because we've done this command over and over, and if you're not familiar with mix, go ahead and check out the mix episode in the Elixir Basics playlist. But we want to add a flag here. So we want to do --sup, S-U-P. The sup flag creates our application with a supervision tree. In Elixir applications, structure is imposed by having a top-level supervisor process, which starts all the other processes in your application, which can include more supervisors with children. This structure is what gives Elixir its fault tolerance features, as failure is isolated to some branch of the tree, where the supervisor of that branch can either restart the failed children or allow itself to fail as well, working its way to the next highest supervisor. So with that being said, I'm going to hit enter and create our project. And now let's open up our project. So VS Code, file, open folder, our first API. I'll drag this over here. Okay, so now that our project is open, let's open up our mix.exs file. You see a project which returns our project configuration, like project name, version, Elixir version. And we've gone through all this stuff in the past, so this is all pretty much the same. You also see our application. This is the entry point. And then you see our private function deps. And that is where we add our dependencies that we need for our project. And for this project, we do need to have 2 dependencies here. And the first one that we're going to need is called plug underscore cowboy. And we just have to put it within these square brackets because it's a list of dependencies. And the plug cowboy is a module composed of 2 modules. It has a plug module and the cowboy module. Plug gives us tools to work with HTTP requests, like building routers and endpoints, setting status codes, and body parsing. But it does not know how to handle connections. Cowboy is a web server written in Erlang that handles all connections and processes any incoming and outgoing requests. All right. And then we're also going to need this dependency, JSON. And what JSON is a super fast JSON parser and generator, which we will use to handle our JSON. Okay. And you're probably wondering how do you know what version to use, right? So we have plug 2.0 and JSON 1.4. If I go ahead and just pull open a web browser here, we will search for plug underscore cowboy Elixir GitHub. And we'll open up the first one here. And this is the project. So Elixir plug cowboy. And if we scroll down, you can see the installation rules is plug cowboy 2.0. 0. And I'm going to be walking through these directions in a second, but you can always find documentation on the GitHub page. And then the same thing, we want to know JSON, Elixir, GitHub, and it should be the first one. Yep, a blazing fast JSON parser. And if you scroll down, you'll see 1.4 here. All right, so it's not that hard to figure out. And you always want to make sure you're using the most up-to-date that works with the project you're working on. But since this is brand new, we can use the most recent stable version of that dependency. Okay, so once we have our dependencies in this deps list here, and you'll need a comma in between them, let's save it and pull up our terminal. And we have to cd into the project now. So cd our first API. And now to install our dependencies, we just will do mix space deps.git enter. And now it will go ahead and install plug cowboy and JSON for us and whatever dependencies those dependencies have. Okay, now that that's done, we can go back into our project. And we need to now build our router and configure our application to start listening on port 8080. So let's first start by creating our router.ex file. And we want to create this inside our first API directory right here. You'll see application. We want to have a new file, and we just want to call this router.ex. Hit enter, and then we need to do our def module and let it autocorrect. So you'll have the name of the directory in camel case and then the name of the file. So our first API .router. We need to bring plug into scope here. So we need to type in use plug.router, and that gives us access to plug.router in the scope of this file because we installed that dependency with the plug cowboy. And then we want to also add, so this is a very typical process you're going to go through every time you start an API project. We want to attach the logger so we can see incoming requests in the shell when we're testing. So we're going to do plug and then capital plug dot capital L for logger and then closing parentheses, and that attaches the logger to incoming requests. And then we're going to do plug opening parentheses colon match closing parentheses. And this tells plug to match the incoming requests to our defined endpoints. And we'll get to our defined endpoints in just a second, and then you'll understand what it's matching. All right, and then we want to do plug opening parentheses capital plug dot parsers comma. And then you can write this all in one line, but we're basically setting up our JSON parser right now. And we're going to hit return and then do a tab in just so it's easier to read. And we're going to say, we're going to pass in parsers colon, and then opening square bracket colon JSON, and then closing square bracket, comma, and then return again, and then we're going to pass opening square bracket application / JSON, and then close those quotation marks and another square bracket. And then we need another a square bracket, a comma, and then return. And then we need to say what JSON decoder we're using. So JSON underscore decoder colon, and it's JSON. And we just installed that dependency, and then you can go ahead and hit return. And so once there is a match right here, we parse the response body if the content type is application / JSON. And we only want to parse the body. So the order of these things matters because we only want to parse the body if we have a match. Okay, so we don't want to do extra work if we don't even have an endpoint that matches. Okay, does that make sense? And then we want to do plug opening parentheses colon dispatch. And it dispatches the connection to the matched handler, okay? And now for our handlers, we're going to just do we're going to have one handler at just our base endpoint, and then we're going to have a fallback handler to catch all the errors that come through, okay? So we're going to have a GET request, so GET, and then do a quotation mark, / now closing quotation mark, comma, do, and this is just our default endpoint. So when we hit our local host, port 8080, this is the endpoint that's going to get hit, okay? And we're going to just return send response, and we have to pass in con, which has request information in it, and we'll get into that in just a second. And then we're going to return a 200 code, and then comma, and okay. All right, so when we hit this endpoint, it's going to return a status code of 200, which means there is no error, right? And that it is okay. So that endpoint, when we hit it, we'll just get an okay with a 200 status code. And now for our fallback, if someone hits an endpoint that isn't set up yet, we just are going to do a match. So anything that falls through, comma, do, and then we're going to send underscore response, opening parentheses, and then pass in our con again. And this time we're doing a 404, which means not found for status codes. And if you want to look up API status codes, you can Google that real easily. And then we'll just return a string, not found. So if we hit any endpoints that don't exist, we'll get the 404 not found error. Okay, so that is all it takes to set up our router. We have one endpoint that we can hit and we'll get a 200 status. And then we have one fall through. So we're not quite ready to spin up the server and test it though. But I know I say this a lot. We need to write tests because tests are important. And I know a lot of people can be easily confused with how to write tests, especially for like a router file. So let's go ahead and write our tests before we move forward. So let's expand this test folder, and we're going to make a new directory inside of it. And we're going to call this r_first_API_test. And then inside here, we're going to make a new file. And this is going to be called router_test.exs. Okay. And now that that's created, we can make our def module. And that's our first API test.router test for the file name. All right. So when we're setting up tests, we need access to our xunit.case. All right, so we need to say use xunit.case, and we've done this before. This part is not new. Now, one new part is we want to run these tests concurrently because this is an asynchronous. Anytime you're doing any web requests or anything to an API, it's asynchronous, right? So we want to say async. Sorry, I'm having problems typing, and set this to true. And then we also want access to our plug.test module. So use plug.test, capital T. This allows us to have the con object available within this test, okay? All right, and now something new that we haven't used before is a module attribute. And you can look at it as pretty much like a variable within this module. So within this scope, and you just create an attribute with the @ symbol, and then whatever is after it. So OPTS is the variable name. That's how we're going to access it. And we're just going to call our plug init function from our router file I'll show you how we're using this in a second. So we're just going to say our first API dot, our first API dot router dot init. And then we're just going to pass in an empty list. We're going to create a test for our GET request. Okay. So we're just going to say test, opening quotation marks, return. Okay. Close off those quotation marks and then type in a do, and then that end should autocomplete. All right. So first we want to build a connection to our GET request. So we're going to name this variable build underscore con equals con, and then we're passing in a GET, and the name of our route is just /. All right, so we're building the connection here. And now we're going to say con equals, and this is basically we're just establishing what the connection variable has. Now we're just calling the plug.call with our connection we just built and other options. And our options above is the router we called the plug init. So we're just initializing our router, and those are the options we're going to be passing in. And so to get this connection variable the way we need it, we're going to do our first API.router.call, and then we're going to pass in our build con variable, comma, and then we can go ahead and hit that attribute options with a @opts. Close those parentheses. There we go. So now we have our connection object created in our test. Now all we're going to do is what we've done in the past. So the connection variable is the only thing that can kind of throw a curveball at writing our tests. But now we're just doing our assert, and you've seen that plenty of times. So we're doing assert, all right, space, and now we want to do con.state. So we want to check the state of our connection object, and we're going to make sure it's equal to an atom sent. And then we're going to do assert con.status, and we want to make sure that's equal to 200. And then assert con, we want to hit that response body. So RESP underscore body, and we want to make sure this is equal to capitalized OK, so a string, okay? And then go ahead and save it. And if we pull up our terminal again and run mix space test, it's going to run our tests, and hopefully everything passes. It's going to build and compile our project first. And we got an error. And let's see, it says the JSON parser expects a JSON decoder option. Let's go check that out. Let's go back to our terminal or our VS Code and go into our router file. Oh, I have a typo. I said decoder. So get rid of that R. We want a JSON underscore decoder. Save that again. And now let's go back to our terminal and hit mix test. And there we go. So we had a doc test and 2 tests, 0 failures. That is awesome. So the doc test and the second, we only wrote 1 test, right? If we go to VS Code though, we'll see that they created a file for us, a .ex called hello world, which you're pretty familiar with seeing that all the time. And they just created a test that checks for that. So we could delete these 2 things. Why don't we do that actually? So delete our first API.ex in the lib directory. Command backspace, move to trash. And then let's go ahead and delete our first API underscore test that is just checking for the atom world. Command backspace, move to trash. Okay, so now if we were to run tests again, we're just going to see 1 test. There we go, 1 test, 0 failures. That's pretty cool. So our endpoint is working, but we haven't tested the actual server, the web server yet. So we have to go and set up our web server to run on port 8080. Let's go back to VS Code. And now we have to open up this application.ex file. We have to start up our router to Cowboy and to start an HTTP server to actually handle real requests. So we need to start a child process here. So with that, we need to do an opening curly brace. We want to start our plug.cowboy web server. The scheme is HTTP, and then our plug that we're passing in is our first API.router. So we're passing in our router for the HTTP server. And then we need to pass in our options, colon. And right now, the only options we're going to worry about, it's list form though. So opening and closing square brackets. We want to set our port and then do a colon here to 8080. All right. And now if we save this, we can now go back to our terminal. And if we do IEX-S mix run, it will kick off our HTTP server. Okay, so now that it's running, let's go ahead and open up our web browser again. I'll drag it over. Let's just do a new tab. And if we do localhost colon 8080 and hit enter, boom, how cool is that? So right there, we get our OK response back. And if we were to do something like / aliens underscore name, boom, not found. We hit our handler, our error handler that sends our 404 status with an error of not found. So we don't have this endpoint set up. Pretty cool, right? Now though, why don't we set up that endpoint? Like we want to get our alien's name. Like we know there's an alien out there. We want to know his name. So if we went back into our router.ex file, let's just put it in between our not found and our just /get. So our default endpoint. We can do the same thing. We can do a get space quotation mark / and if we type in aliens underscore name, close off those quotations, comma, do colon, and then if we send a response, send underscore response, opening parentheses, send in our connection object, and then comma, we want to send a 200 back because it is a successful endpoint. And we want to send in, we want to send Blork's name. So Blork space Erlang, close those quotations, close off those parentheses, save it. And now if we go back to our terminal, we can just recompile right here. All right, it compiled our file. And now if we go back to our browser and hit enter at alien's name where it used to be not found, now we get a response body back, Blork Erlang. So that's pretty freaking cool. Okay, so we got our base project set up and our web server set up. In this series, we will be building on this API project each time, adding feature by feature until we actually have a legitimate REST API. So for your challenge, I just want you to add a test for our alien's name endpoint. So do exactly what we did for our default endpoint, which is just a /, but I want you to actually check for the status, the response. I can't remember all three of them. Let's go in our tests. So I want you to check for the state, the status, and then the response body, okay? Super easy. As always, if you need help or want to check out the solutions, check out that GitHub link in the description. And if you have more questions or just want to hang out and chat, join my Discord server, Backend Stuff. The link is also in the description. If you want to learn how to build scalable, production-ready APIs, hit that subscribe button now. See you next time.